Welcome everyone, Questine here with a discussion about the High Elves in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. And they are probably the lamest race to play at the moment in the context of the Warhammer 3 meta. I mean, Cathay has a whole bunch of issues. Their corner situation, their climate situation, their lack of replenishment, Harmony, the Great Bastion, I can go on. I already did. But here's the thing, for all the problems that Cathay has, I would dare say that, for Cathay, it's clearly the case that they are an unfinished race. They need one or two DLC packs to be complete. Like, they certainly need one more hero time, maybe another legendary lord type. There are absolutely problems with Cathay. But for the High Elves, I would say in some ways it's worse, because the High Elves are a very strong race. They do have a diverse group of legendary lords, each of which plays very differently on the campaign map, be it the vanilla that Tyrion is, the focus on handmaidens and defending Ulfwan that Alariel focus on, the magic focus of Teclis, the greenskin focus of Elfarion, the dark elf vengeance plot of Alifanar. So there is a good amount of variety in High Elven campaigns, at least in theory. In practice, maybe not quite as much. But here's the problem with the High Elves. Inherently so. The High Elves generate trade resources with their base economic structure. And they also generate more money if they have a high level of control. Now, the problem with this is that High Elves don't have the best early game economy, but they do have a lot of scalability. This is one of the reasons that if you're looking to play a world domination campaign, the High Elves are one of your best choices, because the more you build up, the more people you encounter, the more you trade with those people, the stronger you get. And you're really good at dealing with any rebellions that might pop off, if they even do occur, because you do have a ridiculous level of control available to you as the High Elves in a long-term campaign, especially as Alariel. But here's the problem. All of those are long-term tangible benefits, but early on, where the meat of a campaign does take place, is a really dull experience, because in every single High Elven campaign, with the exception of Alifanar recruiting a Shadow Warrior, Shadow Walker, Doomstack, or Stack, you are going to be doing the same thing over and over and over again in every single campaign, with no exception, because it is the most effective option, and honestly, it's the only real option that you have available. And what is that option? Recruit a bunch of spearmen, recruit a bunch of archers, light armor, without armor. Some people will argue that even recruiting archers with light armor is not worth it, that you should just recruit regular archers because of the difference in upkeep. This is a situation that the High Elves confront themselves with. In theory, they have a diverse number of units. Flying units, for instance, dragons, infantry units, cavalry, heroes. But what High Elven campaigns end up playing as is focusing on that spearman archer meta, because it is one really effective, and because in order to use other units, you either need to at least get to tier 3 to get things like White Lions of Crix, for instance, or cavalry that's worth recruiting with the Silver Helm with shields. And by the way, it's ridiculous that we have two versions of the Silver Helms at the same tier, one with shields and one without. Why would you recruit the unshielded version? I have no clue whatsoever. I understand, it's more expensive, but yeah, it's a bronze shield. It's probably worth it, because you're not going to have so many cavalry units, if you even have them at all. So that variety of armies is not particularly great. On top of that, we got to talk about heroes. The only hero they can recruit at tier 2 is the noble, and only one. Unless you're playing Emmerich, in which case you do have his special skill line, which can recruit more nobles. Every other hero type is either recruited at tier 3, and honestly, in all High Elven campaigns, with the exception of Alariel, you can only recruit one mage at tier 3. Everything else, like Lore Masters of Hoeth or Handmaidens, are either recruited at tier 4 or they increase capacity at tier 4. And by the time you even get to tier 4, even if you push for it, chances are your campaign is over. Like over here, for instance, I got the growth building. I've had this territory under my control for a good amount of time with the extra growth benefit, and only next turn at turn 33 and at turn 34 will I be able to start moving to tier 4. Now sure, the AI can beat you to it, and if you do manage confederations well enough, you can potentially get there faster. But having to spend 30 or so turns, maybe 25 if you push for it, if you get a lot of growth buildings, but having to spend anywhere between 25 to 30 plus turns to even access certain heroes, let alone increase the capacity of others, is not a great dynamic to be dealing with in any particular campaign. And same with the unit roster. So not only do you have very boring armies, you don't even have the heroes in a lot of situations to actually use those armies. There are exceptions, of course, Teclis, Emmerich, Alariel, but consider Tyrion, consider Elfarian, consider Alifanar. They don't have that kind of benefit in their campaigns. And even for the campaigns that get extra heroes, it's only of one particular type. It's not like you're getting a lot of heroes in general. You're just getting one particular type. So that means that by the time you actually do start unlocking heroes, and also you might achieve your victory condition, your short campaign victory condition, which increases all hero capacity, you've already won the game, pretty much. And then you end up recruiting a massive heroes at the same time, and they're meaningless and fluff. And that's really annoying in that respect, and from that particular perspective. What worsens this particular situation from my perspective is the influence system. So every high elf lord or hero, yes, I'm using the recruit defeat the legendary lords mod in this particular campaign, and yes, Teclis they get wiped out, but every lord and every hero does require influence to have a positive stat. Otherwise, even if it's just 10 and it's a meaningless stat, otherwise they have downsides. Now, some of these are important, some of these are unimportant, but yeah, like for instance, 10% construction cost in a local province is not great to deal with, or losing melee attack, melee defense for your basic military units. So you end up even with less diversity in that because you need influence, or you make the entire influence system meaningless by using the load save character system. So the recommendation here is you start playing certain campaigns, you get, like, Elfarian's really good for this in some respects. Also, well, it's a combination. Like, if you want hand maintenance, Alariel, because she has easy access to them. If you want nobles, Emmerich, all that. But the point is, you play certain campaigns, you save up a huge cast of heroes and lords with good positive traits, and then you load them up in other campaigns without having to pay that influence cost. So influence is a frustrating, annoying system. Either you have so much influence that you have absolutely nothing to spend on that's worth it, or you're scrapping the barrel for every bit of it to actually have lords and heroes that don't have a negative trait. It's not even a question of positive traits, but this actually compounds the issue, because it means, yes, high elves have amazing scalability in their campaign, but early on, where it's the most interesting portion of the campaign, they are always struggling for that. Or you cheese it, and then you trivialize even the beginning portion of the campaign, which is not particularly great. And then on top of that, all of these units that you do have, like Phoenix Guard, Arcane Phoenixes, Star Dragons, Dragon Princes, Moon Dragons, all that, you almost never recruit them in a campaign, because why would you? Unless you're dealing with some endgame crisis situation, you're probably not going to bother with. Why bother recruiting a Dragon stack when you're going to recruit 3 Archer Spearman stacks? And sure, they aren't going to be as strong, and you might struggle in certain fights like this situation, but you know, free stacks is free stacks. Besides, you have regiments right now and available as well, so you can always use those to win these kind of engagements situation. And besides, this might look like a fairly scary situation. It's not quite as scary as it looks. I also have Elfarian over there in that situation. So you do have that dynamic. On top of that, what also makes Cafe really, really lame to play is that in theory, you have a great diversity of campaigns, right? Because Elfarian doesn't start in Wolf 1, only Alariel and Tyrion start in Wolf 1. But here's the thing, in every High Elven campaign, you're heavily incentivized to go back to Wolf 1 to get access to Legendary Lords. But the best way to confederate Legendary Lords, from my experience, is like the more of Wolf 1 you control, the easier it is to confederate other High Elven factions. That is my personal experience with High Elven campaigns. I'm not sure entirely how the system works, but you get the notion. And yes, you do get to a point in a campaign where you're generating so much ridiculous money from trade that you won't maintain the same number of armies as Cafe. But outside of Cafe's particular brand of bullshit with upkeep, you're still in a ridiculous situation from that perspective. Also, like, Wolf 1 gives you a lot of landmarks, but think on this situation. While there's absolutely an argument to be made about, like, oh, you're playing an Imperial campaign, you want to go back to the Empire, it's actually more important for the High Elves to do so than in other campaigns. Part of the problem here is also victory conditions. Like, for instance, some of the campaign victory conditions are pretty freaking awful. Especially the long campaign victory conditions could absolutely use a substantial update in how they work. Also, you have a situation like Tyrion needing to defeat Malekith to achieve his short campaign victory condition, which makes the whole campaign lame because already you don't have the hero advantages like, say, Alariel, but it's even worsened by the fact that for you to even get that +3 hero capacity, that Alariel has a much, much easier time accessing, because all she needs to do is defeat factions that are threat in Wolf 1, that start in Wolf 1, to get it and take 30 settlements. Tyrion needs to go and deal with Malekith. That worsens the situation in a campaign to deal with. It means that in every High Elven campaign, even if you might want to do something else, you're always going to be drawn to Wolf 1. Part of the reason is, like, High Elven scalability of economy depends on trade agreements. Well, Wolf 1 is in a prime position to take advantage of that because you get vision on West and East. Old World, New World, you get vision with a lot of factions. You get a lot of trade agreements going. There's also a lot of ports in Wolf 1 that you can take advantage with one of your economic benefits that increases income from ports in a particular province, and also increases your trade tariff. So you are incentivized to go to Wolf 1. Also, trade resources that are available to Wolf 1. It's not, again, the landmarks alone would push you to it. It's a similar problem for the Dark Elves, but I'll get into why the Dark Elves don't suffer from this. But yeah, things like, and then even beyond Wolf 1, you almost always want to go deal with Nagrand in a campaign. So again, every High Elven campaign feels the same bloody thing over and over again. Deal with Wolf 1, deal with Nagrand. Doesn't matter who we're talking about. Tyrion does this, Alariel does this, Alifanar does this, Elfarian is incentivized to do this, Imric is heavily incentivized to do this, Teclis is heavily incentivized to do this. Every single High Elven campaign is incentivized to do it. That is lame as fuck. Like, say what you will about Cafe, right? But when you have the fake diversity of starting positions and all that, and you realize it's not really there, that makes the entire experience very lame to play. And while you do have more diversity of climate because of the legendary lords, like, you know, Emmerich having Wasteland, for instance, like, it says a lot about Emmerich. He starts in one of the best campaign areas and one of the most fun and entertaining ones, and even his campaign doesn't necessarily avoid this. In particular, by the way, with consider Emmerich's situation, Teclis doesn't necessarily have this dynamic, but Elfarian literally starts with a city in Torivres, and you are heavily incentivized to keep Torivres, because Torivres gives you the ability of recruiting those special units he has, which are fun to use, but having Torivres is the easiest way to do it. Emmerich literally gets an event, which is really annoying to complete, but gets an event to confederate Calador. So again, further incentive. The only one who's not incentivized, who doesn't have that as much incentive, is Teclis, and he honestly has the worst fucking campaign in the game. So again, because if you're gonna get Ulfan, you're gonna want to deal with Nagrand, even if the climate of Nagrand is not particularly great, because otherwise, well, beyond the fact you're going to miss out on certain things, you're going to be attacked by Morathi and Malekith at one point if you ignore them. Or by Morathi, Malekith, and Valkia at the same time, potentially. And Sevault. That can happen. That does happen. Don't even get me started on the fact that in virtually every single campaign in this area, in Wolf 1, in Northern Wolf 1, Be'lakor is just a troll that just decides to annoy the crap out of you. Those kind of issues. Or the fact that the Defender of Wolf 1 is a very, very lame mechanic. It's powerful. It gives you, control, growth, leadership, etc. And if you max it out, I believe that's dependent on public order. But if you do max it out, it ends up being even more powerful. But yeah, if you lose a single region, it goes from positive to negative. You start suffering penalties in terms of construction cost in particular. It's also bugged. Yes, it's also bugged as a system. So that's great to deal with. And it's quite a shame. Because in a lot of ways, High Elves are very appealing as a race. They are. Further problem that adds to this. Siege tactics. You have only two good ways of dealing with wolves in a siege. One, you get crappy artillery that's not particularly great to deal with it. Eagle Claw bolt throwers are really crap against wolves. So that's one problem. Or you invoke the Invocation of Vol, which has a 30 turn cooldown. You have it for 10 turns. You have to wait 20 turns to invoke this early. And this gives you an army ability to break down wolves. As opposed to Warriors of Chaos with, their Shatterstone capability that they have in every battle and can have continuously. That is absolutely very lame. And overall, I would say the problem with the High Elves is this. Fundamentally speaking. Beyond the fact that you're doing the same things, or you're incentivized, heavily incentivized to do the same things over and over again. The problem is, by the time you would actually have that kind of army diversity, by the time you could actually have hero diversity, which, for the record, Cathay has an easier time with that. Yeah, Cathay, for all its problems, has easier access to a greater diverse cast of heroes. By the time you can actually use them, your campaign is over. And everything else is just a grindy mess. So you can't even enjoy this. Like, I would recommend playing modded campaigns. But even then, you realize, yes, it creates a better early game situation, but the long-term problems still exist. And even early game doesn't necessarily improve it by as much as it should. But we're not finished. Because then we have this research tree. And holy shit, is this research tree a freaking mess. Like with other things of the High Elves, early on it's crap. And then it gets really powerful, but by the time it gets powerful, it's pointless. Like, I'll give you an idea. The only things that are good over here in this research tree early on are archery prowess, spear wall, and militia training. And then you get an archive, which allows you to recruit mages, get military advancements to get precise fletching and martial law. Every other military benefit that you could get over here is complete fucking fluff. Some useful things still exist, absolutely, undeniably so, but you're probably going to want to, get trade resources and get either trade goods advancements over here to access some of the really substantial benefits that you can get, like growth or industry building income, trade tariff, upkeep for dragons if you care about it, or, 10% construction costs for buildings, or focus on cultural advancements, because they give you quite a few benefits in terms of, like, pretty much everything that you'd care about with regards to your empire. But by the time you even have access to that, again, the campaign is over. I understand that it's not an ideal situation to judge all races by how well they do in the early game. The problem of Warhammer 3 is the game is clearly focused on those first 30 turns. It's always been the case in Total War games that the early game has been the most important aspect of the campaign. Absolutely. It's especially so in Warhammer 3, but it's always been the case. But that is the meta, and that is how things do play out. So I would like to enjoy the High Elves, but they feel so really dull. Powerful, but dull as dirt. Costin, signing out.